I still remember the day Catherine was born. February 14, 1987. Valentine's Day. The greatest gift I'd ever received. Her mother, Sarah, had been in labor for nearly 20 hours, and when they finally placed that tiny, red-faced bundle in my arms, I wept. Not just a few tears, mind you. I'm talking about the kind of sobbing that makes the nurses exchange knowing glances. First time Dad, they whispered to each other, smiling. They were right, of course. But they couldn't possibly understand what that moment meant to me. See, I'd grown up in foster care. Bounced from home to home throughout Pennsylvania until I finally aged out of the system at 18. No real family to speak of. And now, holding Catherine, I had created something permanent. Something that would outlast me. For the first time in my life, I had a blood connection to another human being. She's got your eyes, James, Sarah had whispered, exhausted but radiant. And she did. Deep blue, almost indigo. The doctor said they might change color as she got older, but they never did. I promised myself that day that Catherine would have everything I never had. Stability. Security. A father who would move heaven and earth for her. And for 35 years, I kept that promise. I worked double shifts at the construction company to put money away for her college fund. When the housing market crashed in 2008, I took on night work as a security guard to make ends meet. Sarah and I scrimped and saved. No fancy vacations. No new cars. Everything we did was with Catherine's future in mind. And Catherine was worth every sacrifice. She was brilliant. Valedictorian of her high school class. Full scholarship to Princeton. I couldn't have been prouder watching her walk across that stage to collect her diploma. Dad, she'd said, hugging me after the ceremony, I wouldn't be here without you. Sarah passed away from breast cancer when Catherine was 25. It hit us both hard. My wife had been the mediator between us, smoothing over the rough patches when Catherine's stubborn nature, which she definitely inherited from me, caused friction. After Sarah died, things between Catherine and me became strained. She moved to Boston for a job at a prestigious marketing firm. Our phone calls became less frequent. When she did call, she always seemed to be in a hurry. Too busy to talk. Too busy to visit. I told myself it was natural. She was building her own life. But it still hurt. Then she met Elliot. Elliot Pearson. Harvard Business School graduate. Came from old money up in Connecticut. The type of guy who wore loafers without socks and talked about his summer home in the Hamptons. From the moment I met him, something felt off. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes. The dismissive way he looked around our modest home in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Like he was calculating its value and finding it wanting. He's very successful, Catherine had said defensively, when I tried to express my concerns. Money isn't everything, Katie, I'd replied, using the childhood nickname she'd long outgrown. Her eyes had flashed with annoyance. It's Catherine, Dad. And you wouldn't understand. Elliot has connections. He's going places. And just like that, the divide between us widened. The wedding invitation came 6 months after they'd started dating. A thick cream envelope with gold embossing. Fancy. Expensive. The kind of thing Sarah would have found unnecessarily extravagant. We're keeping it intimate, Catherine explained over the phone. Just close friends and family. The ceremony was held at Elliot's parents' estate. A sprawling mansion overlooking the Atlantic. I felt out of place in my rented tux, surrounded by people who summered as a verb and discussed hedge funds over cocktails. Catherine looked beautiful, but somehow different. Her hair was highlighted in ash blonde that Sarah would have said washed out her complexion. Her laugh sounded practiced. Rehearsed. Elliot's father, Richard, cornered me by the bar. Construction, is it? He'd asked, swirling his scotch. Fascinating. Always admired men who work with their hands. His tone suggested the opposite. 40 years now, I'd replied, refusing to be embarrassed by honest work. Catherine certainly has done well for herself, he continued. Elliot tells me she's being considered for partnership at the firm. Of course, now that she'll be a Pearson, doors will open. The Pearson name still means something in Boston. I'd nodded, swallowing the urge to point out that my daughter had earned everything she'd achieved on her own merit. After the wedding, Catherine and Elliot bought a brownstone in Beacon Hill. I visited once, shortly after they moved in. The place was immaculate. Like something out of a magazine. Not a thing out of place. You can put your coffee down there, Dad, Catherine had said, quickly sliding a coaster under my mug when I'd rested it on the glass coffee table. Elliot spent most of my visit taking work calls in his home office. When he did emerge, he spoke mostly to Catherine, as if I were invisible. Don't forget we have dinner with the Whitmores tonight, he'd reminded her. Stephen's considering our proposal for the waterfront project. Catherine had nodded, all business. I've already confirmed the reservation at L'Espalier. They seemed more like business partners than newlyweds. That was the last time I visited their home. After that, our relationship existed primarily through occasional phone calls and obligatory Christmas cards. Catherine always had a reason why they couldn't make it to Pennsylvania for the holidays. Elliot's family tradition. Work commitments. It was too far. When I called, she was always just heading into a meeting or picking up the other line. Can I call you back, Dad? She'd ask, but rarely did. Years passed. I retired from the construction company at 65. My niece couldn't handle the work anymore, and my pension, along with Sarah's life insurance, gave me enough to live comfortably in our modest home. Not rich by any means, but I had what I needed. I tried to stay busy. Joined a bowling league. Volunteered at the local Veterans Center. But the silence of the house pressed in on me. Sometimes I'd talk to Sarah's photograph on the mantel, telling her about my day, asking her what our daughter was doing now. Wondering if she'd given us grandchildren yet. I hadn't heard from Catherine in over a year when I bought the lottery ticket. It wasn't something I did regularly. Once in a while, when the jackpot got big enough to make the news, I'd stop by the 7-Eleven on Crawford Street and buy a single ticket. $1 and a dream, as they say. That Wednesday in March, I was picking up milk and the cashier, Dwayne, who'd been working there since he was a teenager, mentioned the Powerball was up to $300 million. Feeling lucky today, Mr. Mitchell? He'd asked, ringing up my milk. On a whim, I added a ticket to my purchase. Quick pick. Let fate decide the numbers. I didn't even watch the drawing that night. Forgot all about the ticket, truthfully, until I stopped by the same 7-Eleven 3 days later for a coffee. Dwayne was practically bouncing with excitement when I walked in. Mr. Mitchell. Have you checked your ticket? The winning ticket was sold here. $300 million, man. I chuckled, patting my wallet where I tucked the ticket away. Guess I should take a look, then. I pulled out the crumpled ticket, and Dwayne eagerly pointed to the winning numbers displayed on a screen behind the counter. First number matched. Second 2. By the third, Dwayne was gripping the counter. Fourth. Fifth. And the Powerball. Holy shit, Dwayne whispered, eyes wide as saucers. Mr. Mitchell, you just won the fucking Powerball. The next few weeks passed in a blur. After taxes and choosing the lump sum option, I walked away with just over $115 million. The lawyers and financial advisors I hired recommended diversifying investments, setting up trusts, and various tax shelters. When the dust settled, I had about $5 million in accessible accounts, with the rest wisely invested for the future. The local paper ran a story. Retired construction worker hits jackpot. They even dug up an old photo of me from a company picnic. I received calls from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in decades. Old coworkers suddenly wanted to reconnect. I changed my phone number. But no call from Catherine. Until 3 months after my win, when my new phone rang with an unfamiliar Boston area code. "Dad? It's me, Catherine." Her voice sounded exactly the same, yet somehow foreign to my ears. It had been so long. "Katie," I said, reverting to the old nickname without thinking. "This is a surprise." A slight pause. "Yes, well, I've been so busy with work, and..." She trailed off, then continued brightly. "Anyway, I have wonderful news. Elliot and I are renewing our vows for our 10th anniversary. Nothing extravagant, just a small ceremony followed by a reception at the Boston Harbor Hotel. We'd love for you to be there." 10 years. Had it really been that long since I'd watched my only child pledge herself to a man who looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe? "That's wonderful, Catherine," I corrected myself. "When is it?" "Next month, the 15th. I know it's short notice, but we only just finalized the details." Her voice took on a hesitant quality. "And Dad, I was hoping, would you consider walking me down the aisle again? It would mean so much to me." Something cold settled in my stomach. 10 years of near silence, and now this sudden desire for a father-daughter moment? "I read about your lottery win," she continued, when I didn't immediately respond. "I was going to call, but I didn't want you to think." "Think what?" I asked quietly. "That I was only calling because of the money," she finished, a nervous laugh punctuating the sentence. "That would be ridiculous, right?" "Right," I agreed, though we both knew it was exactly what I was thinking. "So you'll come? And walk me down the aisle?" I closed my eyes, seeing not the polished Boston professional on the other end of the line, but the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest while I watched baseball games. The teenager who'd made me learn the choreography to some boy band song for a father-daughter talent show. The young woman who'd cried in my arms at her mother's funeral. "Of course, Katie. I'll be there." After we hung up, I sat in my recliner for a long time, staring at Sarah's photograph. "What would you do, old girl?" I asked the smiling face behind the glass. "Our daughter's only interested in me now that I have money. Should I just be grateful for the chance to see her? Or is there something more going on here?" Sarah, of course, didn't answer. But I knew what she'd say. Trust, but verify. It had been her motto throughout our marriage. Don't assume the worst, but don't be naive either. So I hired a private investigator. Frank Delgado had been recommended by my new financial advisor. Ex-Boston PD, now running his own firm specializing in financial fraud and pre-investment background checks. He wasn't cheap, but money was no longer a concern. "What exactly are you looking for, Mr. Mitchell?" Frank had asked during our first meeting at my home. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Just information about my daughter and her husband. Their financial situation. Why she might suddenly want to reconnect after all this time." Frank didn't judge. Didn't raise an eyebrow. Just nodded and took notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "People come into money, relatives crawl out of the woodwork," he said matter-of-factly. "Its tale as old as time. I'll dig around, see what I can find." 2 weeks later, Frank returned with a thick manila folder. "You might want to pour yourself something strong before we get into this," he suggested, placing the folder on my kitchen table. I opted for coffee instead. Needed a clear head. "Your son-in-law's family lost most of their money about 5 years ago," Frank began, opening the folder to reveal financial statements, newspaper clippings, and photographs. "Richard Pearson made some bad investments. Real estate primarily. The 2008 crash hit them hard, but they managed to keep up appearances until around 2019, when they started quietly selling off assets. I leaned forward, studying a spreadsheet that showed a steady decline in net worth. The estate where your daughter got married? Sold to a tech entrepreneur from California. The Pearson name might still mean something in Boston's social circles, but the money behind it is mostly gone. Frank flipped to another section. Your son-in-law's firm isn't doing much better. They've lost several major clients in the past year. There have been layoffs. Elliot's position seems secure for now, but... He shrugged, letting the implication hang in the air. And Catherine? I asked, dreading the answer. She's no longer with the marketing firm. Left about 2 years ago to start her own consulting business. It's not doing well. Frank showed me tax records that painted a grim picture. They've taken out a second mortgage on the brownstone. Credit card debt approaching 6 figures. And this, he slid a document across the table, is a copy of an application for a personal loan. They were denied. I sat back, processing the information. My daughter was in financial trouble. Serious trouble. And suddenly, out of the blue, she was inviting her newly wealthy father back into her life. There's more, Frank said, his expression turning grim. He pulled out several photographs. They showed Elliot leaving an upscale hotel with a woman who was definitely not my daughter. This has been going on for at least a year, according to my sources. The woman is Vanessa Whitmore, daughter of Stephen Whitmore. The waterfront project, I murmured, remembering the conversation from my visit years ago. Frank nodded. Whitmore Capital is one of the few major clients Elliot's firm has left. Draw your own conclusions. My coffee had gone cold. I pushed it away, suddenly nauseated. One last thing, Frank said, pulling out a final document. I found this interesting. Your daughter and son-in-law recently updated their wills. Both documents now include explicit mentions of any inheritance or financial windfall you might leave to Catherine. The picture was becoming painfully clear. Thank you, Frank, I said quietly. You've been very thorough. After he left, I poured myself the drink after all. A generous whiskey, neat. Sarah and I had kept a bottle of Macallan 18 for special occasions. This seemed to qualify, though not in the way we'd ever imagined. I stayed up late that night, going through Frank's file again and again, hoping to find some alternative explanation. Some evidence that my daughter wasn't just after my money. That her sudden desire to reconnect wasn't calculated and cold. But the evidence was overwhelming. Catherine and Elliot were desperate for money. My lottery win was a potential solution to their problems. The vow renewal, this performance of family togetherness, was nothing but theater designed to get close to me and my newfound wealth. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I could confront Catherine. Call her out on her transparent attempt to use me. But what would that accomplish? More estrangement? More silence? Or I could play along. Attend the vow renewal. Walk her down the aisle. Pretend I didn't know what she was up to, and hope that maybe, just maybe, real connection might follow the fake one. But there was a third option. One that Sarah would probably disapprove of, but that appealed to the part of me that had survived foster care. The part that had learned early on that sometimes, the only justice you get is the justice you make for yourself. I could teach my daughter a lesson about greed, entitlement, and the consequences of treating family as nothing more than a potential payday. By the time I finished the Macallan, I had made my decision. The Boston Harbor Hotel was exactly the kind of place Elliot would choose. Opulent. Historic. Overlooking the water. The kind of venue that signaled to everyone in attendance that you had arrived. I checked in the day before the ceremony, taking a suite that cost more per night than I used to make in a month. The irony wasn't lost on me. Catherine had arranged for us to have breakfast together in the hotel restaurant the morning of the renewal. When I walked in, I spotted her immediately, sitting at a table by the window, checking her watch. Some things never change. Dad, she exclaimed, rising to greet me with a hug that felt rehearsed. You look great. I returned the embrace, noting the expensive perfume, the diamond earrings, the Cartier watch that must have cost a fortune they didn't have. So do you, Catherine. Boston clearly agrees with you. We settled into awkward small talk as we ordered. The weather. My flight. How lovely the hotel was. Finally, as our food arrived, Catherine reached across the table and took my hand. Dad, I owe you an apology, she said, her expression contrite. I haven't been a good daughter these past few years. After Mom died, I threw myself into my career. Into building a life with Elliot. And I neglected our relationship. I'm sorry. The words sounded practiced. Like a sales pitch she'd been refining in her head. It's water under the bridge, I replied, squeezing her hand before withdrawing mine. Tell me about this vow renewal. Whose idea was it? A flicker of something, relief, crossed her face. Mine, actually. 10 years is a significant milestone, don't you think? And with everything going so well for us professionally, it seemed like the perfect time to celebrate. The lie rolled off her tongue so easily. Everything going well professionally. Right. And Elliot's parents? Will they be there? I asked, knowing full well that Richard Pearson had suffered a minor stroke the previous year, another detail Frank had uncovered. A slight hesitation. Unfortunately, no. Richard hasn't been well, and Elizabeth doesn't like to leave him. But they sent their best wishes. More likely, they couldn't afford the trip. Or the embarrassment of attending an event they couldn't contribute to financially. That's a shame, I said mildly. I was looking forward to seeing them again. Catherine nodded, then leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Dad, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. Something important. Here it comes, I thought. Elliot and I have been thinking about starting a family. This caught me off guard. A grandchild? Despite everything, the thought sent a jolt of longing through me. But, she continued, we've been facing some challenges. Financial ones. And there it was. The fertility treatments aren't covered by insurance, she explained, eyes downcast in a show of vulnerability. And with the business still in its growth phase, we're stretched pretty thin. The business that was failing. The growth phase that didn't exist. I wouldn't ask if there were any other option, she pressed on, but we're talking about your grandchild, Dad. Your legacy. My legacy. As if the only thing of value I had to pass on was money. I took a long sip of coffee, considering my response carefully. The plan I'd formulated required a delicate balance, giving her just enough hope to proceed with her scheme, while setting the stage for what was to come. How much are we talking about? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Relief flooded her features. She'd been expecting resistance, perhaps even refusal. The full treatment cycle is about $50,000. But even half of that would help us get started. $50,000. A drop in the bucket of my new fortune, but more than I'd ever been able to give her before. More than I'd spent on her entire college education. I see, I nodded thoughtfully. Well, Catherine, family is important. The most important thing, in fact. I'd have to speak with my financial advisors, of course, but I don't see why we couldn't work something out. Her smile was dazzling. Triumphant, even. Really? Oh, Dad, that would mean everything to us. I'm sure it would, I thought. In fact, I continued, warming to my role, I've been thinking a lot about family lately. About legacy, as you put it. The lottery win has forced me to consider what I want to leave behind. Who I want to leave it to. Catherine leaned forward, hanging on every word now. I've been discussing options with my lawyers. Trusts, primarily. I'm not getting any younger, and it's important to have these things in order. Absolutely, she agreed eagerly. That's just good financial planning. I thought perhaps after the ceremony, we could sit down with Elliot. Discuss the future. Make some concrete plans. Her eyes lit up. The fish was taking the bait. That would be wonderful, Dad. Elliot has an excellent head for these matters. He'd be happy to help in any way he can. I bet he would. Well, that's settled then, I said, signaling for the check. Now, tell me about this dress you'll be wearing. Is it the same one from the original wedding? The ceremony itself was a modest affair compared to the original wedding. About 50 guests gathered in the hotel's harborside pavilion. White chairs. An abundance of flowers. A string quartet playing quietly as people were seated. I waited with Catherine in a small anteroom, just as I had 10 years earlier. She wore a champagne-colored gown, elegant and clearly expensive. Her hair was swept up in an intricate arrangement that must have taken hours to create. She looked beautiful. Like her mother. Nervous? I asked, adjusting my tie. Another rental, though no one would know it. I'd left my new wealth largely invisible, wearing the same modest watch I'd had for 20 years, no flashy jewelry or designer labels. A little, she admitted, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from her dress. It's silly, isn't it? We're already married. Not silly at all, I assured her. It's an important day. A recommitment. She nodded, then hesitated before asking, Dad, did you bring the check we discussed? For the treatments? So eager. So transparent. I thought we'd discuss all that after the ceremony, I reminded her gently. With Elliot. Of course, she agreed quickly. I just thought, never mind. You're right. A coordinator poked her head in. We're ready for you. Catherine took a deep breath, plastered on a smile, and took my arm. Let's do this. Walking her down the aisle the second time was a study in contrasts. 10 years ago, I'd been bursting with pride, if somewhat apprehensive about the man waiting at the end of the aisle. Today, I felt only a deep sadness. For what might have been. For what had been lost. Elliot stood at the altar, handsome in a tailored tuxedo, beaming at his approaching wife. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't seen the photos of him leaving that hotel with Vanessa Whitmore, I might have believed he was a devoted husband, overjoyed to be renewing his commitment to my daughter. When we reached the altar, the officiant asked, Who gives this woman? 10 years ago, I had said, her mother and I do. Today, I simply said, I do, and placed Catherine's hand in Elliot's before taking my seat in the front row. The ceremony was brief. They exchanged new rings, platinum bands that must have strained their already precarious finances. They recited vows that emphasized partnership, growth, and future dreams. Catherine's voice broke when she spoke of building a family together. Elliot's remained steady, practiced. The performance of a man who closed deals for a living. At the reception, I was seated at the head table, between Catherine and Elliot's best man, a banker named Preston who talked incessantly about his recent safari in Tanzania. I nodded politely, my attention focused on Catherine and Elliot, who were working the room like politicians, moving from table to table, accepting congratulations and well wishes. After dinner, Elliot finally turned his attention to me. James, he said, clapping me on the shoulder familiarly, as if we'd been close all these years. Catherine mentioned you wanted to speak with us about some financial matters? Yes, I agreed, noting how his eyes lit up with poorly concealed avarice. I've been giving a lot of thought to the future. To family. Wonderful, Elliot nodded, signaling a waiter for more champagne. I have some connections at excellent wealth management firms if you're looking for guidance. I'm sure you do, I thought. That's very kind, I replied. But I've already engaged advisors. What I'd like to discuss is more personal. Perhaps we could find somewhere more private? Elliot glanced around, then suggested, the library bar is usually quiet this time of evening. Shall we? Catherine, who had been monitoring our conversation while pretending to chat with a college friend, quickly excused herself and joined us. Are we having our talk now? The eagerness in her voice was almost painful to hear. Yes, I think now is a good time, I confirmed. The library bar was indeed quiet, with only a few hotel guests nursing drinks in leather armchairs. We found a secluded corner with a small table. Elliot ordered a scotch, Catherine a glass of wine. I asked for water. So, Elliot began once our drinks arrived. Catherine mentioned you've been considering trusts. Very wise. They offer excellent tax advantages and can ensure your assets are distributed according to your wishes. Exactly, I nodded, opening the leather portfolio I'd brought with me. I've had my lawyers draw up some preliminary paperwork. Nothing final yet, but a framework we can discuss. I slid a document across the table. It was the first test. The document was legitimate, my lawyers had indeed prepared it, but it contained a poison pill that any attentive reader would notice. A clause specifying that all funds would be held in trust until the beneficiary reached the age of 65, with only modest disbursements for education and healthcare in the interim. Elliot scanned the document eagerly, Catherine reading over his shoulder. Neither seemed to notice the restrictive clause. They were too focused on the figures, the estimated value of the trust, the potential annual returns. This looks very comprehensive, Elliot commented, trying to sound professional rather than giddy. The allocation strategy is solid. And generous, Catherine added, squeezing my hand. Dad, this is more than we ever expected. Because you thought I'd just hand over a check, no strings attached. Well, family is everything, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Which brings me to the other matter we discussed this morning, Catherine. The fertility treatments. Elliot's eyebrows shot up. He clearly hadn't been informed of this particular angle in their scheme. Yes, Catherine said quickly. I was explaining to Dad about our plans to start a family, and the challenges we've been facing with the treatments not being covered by insurance. Elliot recovered quickly. It's been a difficult road, he agreed, reaching for Catherine's hand in a show of unity. But we're committed to building our family. With my money. And while you're sleeping with Vanessa Whitmore on the side. I understand, I said, my voice carefully neutral. And I want to help. But before I commit to anything, I'd like to understand more about your financial situation. To make sure any assistance I provide is structured in the most beneficial way. A flicker of alarm crossed Elliot's face. Our financial situation? Yes, I confirmed. Your income, assets, debts. The usual. My advisors recommend a complete picture before making significant gifts. Tax implications, you understand. Catherine and Elliot exchanged a quick glance. This wasn't part of their script. I'm not sure that's necessary, Catherine began cautiously. We're doing fine financially. The treatments are just an unexpected expense that's difficult to absorb all at once. I insist, I said firmly. In fact, I took the liberty of having my advisors prepare a financial disclosure form. Standard procedure for estate planning. I removed another document from my portfolio and placed it on the table. This one asked for detailed information about income, investments, property, and outstanding debts. Elliot stared at the form as if it might bite him. This seems rather invasive. Not at all, I countered smoothly. It's the same information you'd provide to any financial institution for a loan. And given that we're discussing a significant gift, I think it's reasonable. Dad, Catherine interjected, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she often used with me. I understand you want to be thorough, but Elliot and I are quite private about our finances. Perhaps we could discuss this another time, after we've had a chance to gather the information? After you've had a chance to fabricate a prettier picture, you mean? Of course, I agreed, gathering the papers back into my portfolio. There's no rush. Though I had hoped to finalize some of these matters while I'm in Boston. My flight leaves Monday morning. The panic was immediate and visible. 3 days wasn't much time to secure what they hoped would be a significant financial windfall. Perhaps we're being overly cautious, Elliot backtracked. Your family, after all. Why don't we invite you to brunch tomorrow at our home? We can review our financial information then, in a more comfortable setting. Catherine nodded eagerly. Yes, that would be perfect. Around 11? I smiled, pleased at how predictably they'd responded to the pressure. That sounds lovely. I look forward to seeing your home again. It's been, 9 years? Catherine had the grace to look embarrassed. Too long, she admitted. Far too long. Back in my hotel suite that night, I laid out the documents Frank had provided. The true state of Catherine and Elliot's finances. The evidence of Elliot's affair. The mortgage statements showing they were 3 months behind on payments. The credit card bills with minimum payments barely being met. I also reviewed the documents my lawyers had prepared based on my instructions. A trust that would pay for fertility treatments, but with strict verification requirements. Medical receipts. Direct payments to providers, not to Catherine and Elliot. Regular progress reports from the doctors. And the most important document, a new will that specifically disinherited Catherine in the event she contested any of its provisions, which included large bequests to several foster care organizations and a modest monthly stipend for Catherine, enough to help, but not enough to rescue them from the financial hole they dug for themselves. I wasn't being vindictive. Not entirely. But I'd worked too hard for too long to see my money squandered by people who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with a convenient family connection. The next morning, I arrived at Catherine and Elliot's brownstone promptly at 11. The facade was as impressive as I remembered, 5 stories of historic Boston architecture in one of the city's most prestigious neighborhoods. But now, with Frank's information, I knew the truth behind the impressive exterior. The second mortgage. The tax liens. The deferred maintenance hidden behind fresh paint and strategic furniture placement. Catherine answered the door herself, dressed casually but expensively in designer jeans and a silk blouse. Dad. Right on time. Come in, come in. The interior was just as I remembered. Immaculate. Carefully curated. More like a museum than a home. No photos of family. No evidence of hobbies or interests. Just expensive furniture and artwork selected to impress. Elliot was in the kitchen, arranging what appeared to be catered food onto serving platters, attempting to pass it off as homemade. James. Welcome. Coffee? Mimosa? Coffee would be great, I replied, taking a seat at the dining table, which had been set with fine china and crystal that I suspected rarely saw use. Catherine busied herself serving the food: quiche, fresh fruit, pastries from a bakery I'd spotted down the street when my taxi dropped me off. Elliot poured coffee into delicate cups that reminded me of the ones Sarah had inherited from her grandmother. The ones Catherine had claimed after the funeral, promising to treasure them. So, Elliot began once we were all seated, about that financial disclosure you requested. We've prepared some documents that should give you a clear picture of our situation. He slid a folder across the table. I opened it to find neatly organized statements that painted a picture of financial health. Income substantially higher than what Frank had uncovered. Debts significantly lower. Assets overvalued. It was, in short, a complete fiction. I nodded, examining the documents carefully, giving no indication that I knew they were falsified. This all looks very organized. Thank you for being so thorough. The relief on their faces was palpable. Now, I continued, about the fertility treatments. I've given it considerable thought, and I'd like to help. Not just with this initial round, but with whatever might be necessary to help you build your family. Catherine's eyes welled with tears that I suspected were at least partly genuine. Whatever else was true, I believed she did want children. Dad, that's incredibly generous. Elliot nodded in agreement, his hand finding Catherine's in another show of unity. We're truly grateful, James. Family is everything, I repeated, the phrase becoming a bitter refrain. However, I'd like to structure this assistance in a way that makes sense financially and ensures the funds are used as intended. A flicker of wariness crossed Elliot's face. What exactly did you have in mind? I removed the trust document from my portfolio. A specialized medical trust. It would cover all fertility-related expenses, treatments, medications, even surrogate costs if it comes to that. But payments would go directly to the providers, with verification of services. It was the first roadblock in their smooth path to my money. Direct payments meant no opportunity to divert funds to their underwater mortgage or credit card debt. That seems unnecessarily complicated, Elliot said carefully. Couldn't you simply provide the funds to us? We'd supply receipts, of course. My advisors were quite clear that this approach offers the best tax advantages, I explained, watching their faces closely. For all of us. Catherine jumped in, her tone conciliatory. If that's what your advisors recommend, then of course we understand. The important thing is being able to start our family. Elliot looked less convinced but nodded in agreement. When could this trust be established? I've already instructed my lawyers to begin the paperwork, I replied. It should be finalized within a few weeks. Weeks? Elliot couldn't keep the disappointment from his voice. We were hoping to begin treatments immediately. The doctor has an opening in her schedule next month. Of course he did. Because they needed money now, not weeks from now. I understand the urgency, I sympathized. Perhaps we could discuss an advance against the trust? A good faith payment to secure the appointment? Hope rekindled in their eyes. That would be ideal, Catherine agreed quickly. Even just enough for the initial consultation and testing would help tremendously. I pretended to consider this, taking a long sip of coffee. I suppose I could write a check today. As a gesture of good faith while the trust is being established. Elliot practically salivated at the prospect. That would be very generous. I named a figure, $10,000. Enough to seem substantial, but far less than the $50,000 Catherine had originally mentioned. Would that be sufficient to get things started? I asked innocently. Absolutely, Catherine assured me, though I could see her mentally recalculating how much of that could be diverted to more pressing financial needs. Excellent, I smiled, reaching for my checkbook. I'll make it out to the fertility clinic directly. What's the name? Another exchange of glances between Catherine and Elliot. Another deviation from their script. Actually, Elliot began, the initial payment needs to be made to our primary physician, who then refers us to specialists. It's a bit convoluted, but that's the healthcare system for you. A transparent lie. But I nodded as if it made perfect sense. In that case, I'll make it out to you, Catherine. But I'll need the doctor's information for my records. For the trust documentation. Of course, she agreed quickly. I'll get you all that before you leave Boston. I wrote the check, knowing full well it would never go to any doctor. $10,000 that would likely be applied to their most pressing debt. A small price to pay for what was to come. After brunch, Elliot excused himself for a quick call with a client, leaving Catherine to give me a tour of the house. She showed me each meticulously decorated room, pointing out artwork and furniture with the practiced patter of someone who had given this tour many times to impress visitors. "And this is the room we're planning to use as a nursery," she said, showing me a small bedroom currently set up as a home office. "Once we're expecting, of course." I studied the room, noting the expensive computer setup, the leather chair that probably cost more than my first car. "It has good light," I observed. "Sarah would approve." At the mention of her mother, Catherine's expression softened. "I miss her," she said quietly. "Especially now, thinking about starting a family. I wish she could be here for it." It was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her all weekend. She would have been an exceptional grandmother, I agreed, feeling the familiar ache of Sarah's absence. "She always hoped for grandchildren." Catherine nodded, blinking back tears that I believed were real. "I know I've been distant, Dad. After Mom died, it was just so hard. Everything reminded me of her. Even you." For a moment, I glimpsed my actual daughter beneath the polished exterior. The girl who had loved her mother fiercely. Who had been shattered by her loss. But then the moment passed, and her expression shifted back to the careful mask she wore now. "We should head back downstairs. Elliot should be done with his call by now." The rest of the visit passed pleasantly enough. More coffee. Small talk about Boston landmarks I should visit while in town. Carefully neutral topics that wouldn't disrupt the fragile détente we'd established. As I prepared to leave, Catherine walked me to the door. "Thank you for the check, Dad. It means more than you know." "I'm sure it does," I thought. "Though not for the reasons you want me to believe." "I'm happy to help," I said instead. "Family is everything." She hugged me, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to remember when those hugs had been genuine. When my daughter had loved me for who I was, not what I could give her. "I'll call you when the trust is established," I promised. "Probably in the next few weeks." "Perfect," she smiled. "And we'll get you that doctor's information right away." I nodded, knowing no such information would be forthcoming. Back at my hotel, I made one final call to Frank Delgado. "Everything's in place," he confirmed. "The package will be delivered to the Pearson residence tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., after you've left for the airport." "And the other arrangements?" "All set. The Boston Globe reporter is very interested in the story. Human interest with a twist. Lottery winner uncovers family scheme. They'll reach out to you for comment after the story breaks, but won't publish anything without your approval." "Good," I said, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and resolve. "And you verified the information about Vanessa Whitmore?" "Multiple sources confirm the affair has been ongoing for over a year. Stephen Whitmore is unaware. I've included photographs, text messages, and hotel receipts in the package. Plus the complete documentation of their financial situation, highlighting the discrepancies between what they showed you and reality." I thanked Frank and ended the call, staring out the hotel window at Boston Harbor. Boats moved slowly across the water, their lights reflecting in the dark surface. I thought about Catherine as a child. Her fear of water after a wave had knocked her down at Cape Cod. How I'd spent an entire summer patiently helping her overcome that fear, one tentative step into the shallows at a time. Where had that little girl gone? When had she become this calculating woman who saw her father as nothing more than a potential solution to her financial problems? I didn't sleep much that night. Kept seeing Sarah's face. Kept hearing her voice. Trust, but verify. But what happened when verification revealed the worst? What was a father supposed to do then? My flight the next morning was at 11 a.m. By the time I was in the air, Catherine and Elliot would have received the package. Would have opened it to find the evidence of their financial deception. The proof of Elliot's affair. And a letter from me. In the letter, I explained that the $10,000 check was the last money they would ever receive from me. That the trust for fertility treatments had been established, but with conditions they would find impossible to meet, including regular financial audits and fidelity clauses that would void all payments if Elliot continued his affair. I also included copies of my new will and a second trust I'd established, this one for any future grandchildren, structured in a way that would provide for their education and well-being without giving Catherine or Elliot access to the funds. Finally, I'd included a USB drive containing a video message I'd recorded. In it, I told Catherine everything I wished I could have said to her face, but knew she wouldn't listen to. How her mother would be heartbroken to see what she'd become. How I'd worked my entire life to give her opportunities one never had, only to be discarded once I was no longer useful. How true family meant more than money, meant showing up, being present, caring about each other's lives. The $10,000 check is valid, I concluded in the video. Consider it payment for a valuable lesson. The money you hope to get from me will go to organizations that help children who don't have families, children like I once was. Perhaps they'll value it more than you did. As the plane reached cruising altitude, I gazed out the window at the clouds below. I felt no triumph. No satisfaction. Only a profound sadness for what might have been. When I landed in Pennsylvania, there were already 6 missed calls from Catherine's number on my phone. 3 from Elliot. Several text messages that ranged from outrage to pleading. I ignored them all. 2 days later, the story ran in the Boston Globe. Lottery winner uncovers family deception. The reporter had been respectful, focusing on the broader issue of lottery relatives while keeping specific details of Catherine and Elliot's scheme vague. I'd insisted on that much. Public humiliation wasn't my goal. But in Boston social circles, the impact was immediate. Elliot's firm placed him on leave pending an investigation into his relationship with a client's daughter. Stephen Whitmore pulled his business. The careful facade they'd maintained crumbled almost overnight. A week passed. Then 2. The calls from Catherine stopped. In their place came a single email. I understand now what you did and why. Not asking for forgiveness. Just wanted you to know that Elliot and I are separating. He's been having an affair. Probably others besides the one you discovered. The irony isn't lost on me that we actually did want to start a family. That part wasn't a lie. But the rest, you're right. About all of it. About what Mom would think. About what I'd become. I'm sorry, Dad. Truly. I read the email several times, searching for manipulation, for an angle. Found none. Just raw honesty from a daughter who'd finally been forced to see herself clearly. I didn't respond immediately. Needed time to process. To decide if this was an opening worth exploring, or just another dead end in our complicated relationship. 6 months later, Catherine called again. She was back in Pennsylvania, she said. Had taken a job at a small marketing firm in Philadelphia. Was living in a modest apartment, trying to rebuild her life after the divorce. I'd like to see you, she said, her voice small, uncertain. Not asking for money. Not asking for anything, really. Just a chance to talk. In person. I agreed to meet her at a diner halfway between our homes. Neutral territory. She looked different when she walked in. Simpler. The highlights gone from her hair, returning it to the rich brown she'd inherited from Sarah. No designer clothes or flashy jewelry. Just jeans, a sweater, and a tentative smile. Hi, Dad, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. Catherine, I nodded, still cautious. Still guarded. Actually, she said, I've gone back to Katie. Seemed right, somehow. A small thing. But significant. We ordered coffee. Talked awkwardly about the weather. About her new job. About my bowling league. Avoiding the elephant in the room until finally, she took a deep breath and addressed it. I've been seeing a therapist, she said, turning her coffee cup in slow circles. Trying to understand how I became the person who would do what I did. To you. To myself. I waited, letting her find her way through the explanation. After Mom died, I was so angry. At everyone. Everything. Especially you, because you kept going. Kept working. Kept living. Her voice caught. I wanted the world to stop. And when it didn't, I decided to become someone else. Someone who didn't feel that pain. Who cared about things like status and money instead of what actually matters. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. Elliot was part of that transformation. He showed me a world where appearances were everything. Where people were valued for what they could provide, not who they were. I bought into it completely. And in the process, I lost myself. Lost the person Mom raised me to be. Lost you. I felt something shift inside me. A crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. The lottery was just the catalyst, she continued. The scheme to get close to you again, to access your money, we would have done it anyway, eventually. When you got older. When we got more desperate. The money just accelerated the timeline. She wiped away a tear. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I wouldn't, in your place. But I wanted you to know that I understand what I did. What I lost. And I'm trying to find my way back. Not to your money. To myself. To being Sarah Mitchell's daughter again. I studied her face, looking for the practiced contrition I'd seen at the vow renewal. Found only raw, painful honesty instead. Your mother once told me, I said finally, that the true measure of a person isn't that they never fall, but how they rise after falling. She believed in second chances. In redemption. Katie nodded, hope flickering in her eyes. Those eyes so like mine. I don't know if we can rebuild what was broken, I continued honestly. Too much has happened. Too many years lost. But maybe we can build something new. Something different. If you're willing to try. If you're patient. I am, she said quickly. However long it takes. I nodded, sipping my coffee, thinking of Sarah. Of what she would want for us. For our daughter. One day at a time, then, I said. We'll start with lunch. See where it goes from there. Katie smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I'd like that. We ordered sandwiches. Talked about safer topics. Found moments of connection, brief glimpses of the relationship we once had. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. As we were finishing our meal, Katie hesitated, then reached into her purse. I brought something for you, she said, placing a small velvet pouch on the table. I opened it cautiously, tipping the contents into my palm. Sarah's wedding ring, on a simple silver chain. Mom wanted me to have it, Katie explained. But it should be yours. At least for now. Maybe someday I'll earn the right to have it back. When I'm more like her again. I closed my fingers around the ring, feeling its familiar contours. She'd be proud of you for this, I said quietly. For trying to find your way back. Katie blinked back tears. Would she? After everything? Yes, I said with certainty. Sarah always believed that people could change. Could grow. She'd give you that chance. And so will I. We parted with a tentative hug. Not the performed embrace from the vow renewal, but something real. Something hopeful. That was 3 years ago. Katie and I have lunch every other Sunday now. She's met someone new, a teacher at a local high school. No family money, no social connections, just a good man who makes her laugh. They're taking things slowly. I've adjusted my will again. The bulk of my lottery winnings still goes to foster care organizations, but I've established a modest trust for Katie. Enough to help, not enough to corrupt. And a separate trust for any future grandchildren. The money changed everything between us. Revealed the worst in my daughter. But it also gave us a chance to start again. To rebuild. To find our way back to what matters most. Not money. Not status. Just family. The real kind. The kind that stays even when there's nothing to gain. Sarah would approve. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.